You are listening to audio recorded at the Village Church. For more information, go to villagechurchbaltimore.com.
Galatians 5, 1 through 15. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ. You who would be justified by the law, you have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit, by faith, we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? The persuasion is not from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view, and the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. But if I, brothers, still preach circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another.
Bob Dylan once sang in a song, I'm going to read the lyrics. My friends from the prison, they ask unto me, how good does it feel to be free? And I answer them most mysteriously, are birds free from the chains of the skyway? I think what Bob Dylan is getting at is this idea that nobody is truly free. You may have prisoners, they may look at people who are not in prison, and they may think, oh, these guys are free. But then Bob Dylan, he's saying, take a look at the creatures that most represent freedom. They fly. They're free from the boundaries of, or the bounds of the gravity as we know it. They can fly, and even they are chained to the skies. In other words, everything has limitations, everything has restraints, everything has chains. We as human beings, we're often looking to break out of these chains. We're looking for freedom all the time. It's human nature, in a sense, to do that. Some of us, we want to be free from financial debt. Some of us, we want to be free from a certain addiction that has a hold on our lives. Some of us, we want to be free from family responsibilities or work responsibilities. Some of us, we want to be free from social expectations. We want to be free from certain stereotypes people put on us. We have different forms, different ways of doing it, but we all long to be free. You know, when I was a senior in high school, one of my biggest changes was I want to get out of the house all the time. I didn't like being at home. I felt like every time I was at home, I was arguing with my mom because she was telling me to do something I didn't want to do, and I wanted to do things she didn't want me to do. Anyways, and so I wanted to be free, and so my goal, I remember my senior year of high school was to get out of the house to find a college on the other side of the country, and so I did. I moved from California to New York, and I wanted to be free. And for a while, I think I did feel free. I think it was an amazing feeling, but soon I discovered there was a new chain in my life, and that was college. And I don't know about you, but my academics in high school, for me personally, it wasn't too bad. I had mostly straight A's. I did pretty well. In college, it was another level. I felt like I was getting beaten down all the time. I felt like I was being destroyed, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I felt like it was this cycle of just studying and studying and studying and failing and failing and failing. I just couldn't understand what was going on. And so it felt like a chain. It felt like I was not free. And so my new goal was to graduate college, and I wanted to be free from college, and so I did. And then I started to experience this new chain, which is sort of like a bunch of chains, actually, called adulting. And adulting, sometimes people put a positive spin on it, and they say these are not chains, these are responsibilities, but they're chains, and you have to, pay your taxes, and you have to pay your water bill, and you have to, research what car repair shop to go to, and all these things. Okay, I started doing all these things, and then later I became married, I became a father, and this may sound kind of harsh if you're not a parent, but I think if you're a parent, you sort of relate. Parenting is a little bit like a chain. okay? And what I mean by that is there are a lot of things that you used to be able to do that you can't do anymore. It's just pretty straightforward. I used to be kind of like a social butterfly. I used to go out almost every night, and then when you have kids, especially young kids, you just can't do that, right? And every time you do go out, you have to bring all the stuff with you. You have to bring, bibs and bottles and strollers and now we're potty training. We're lugging around this potty everywhere, and so we bring all these things with us everywhere, and it's a little bit of a hassle. And I'm sort of already, our daughter's 2, but I'm sort of half anticipating the day when our kids go to college. So it sort of comes full circle. We all long for freedom. Hopefully she goes to college. I guess I don't want to assume. Anyways, the specific types of freedom, they may look different for each one of us, but I think we all long for freedom in different forms depending on our stage of life. We all want to be free from certain restraints that we have on our lives. And oftentimes what happens is we feel like we're chasing something and then we get it and we realize that's not actually what we wanted. And we want to be free now in a new way. We have a new stage of restraint, a new stage of freedom that we're aiming for. Well, the Christian faith offers freedom as well. As Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It doesn't mean that you will lose all of your chains, all of your restraints, all of your limitations. But I think what it means is that there is a very significant chain, a very specific chain that you will lose. And as a result, all the other chains in your life, they will seem insignificant. I think that's what the Christian faith is about. And that's what we'll be talking about today, this freedom that we get through the gospel. Today we're back in the book of Galatians, as was mentioned, and we started this back in October, so we've been going through this for a while, and we took a little bit of a hiatus for several weeks for Christmas, and we had a few one-off things here and there. But now we're back in the book. We're hoping to crank it out in about 4 weeks or so. If you miss all of this, you can listen, by the way, online. If you're a podcaster, you can look us up, Village Church Baltimore, on any podcasting app. You can find us. Today we're in chapter 5, and today's sermon is titled Freedom. And I want to talk about two big things. Number 1, what are we freed from? Number 2, what are we freed for? Pretty straightforward. What are we freed from, and what are we freed for? Firstly, what are we freed from? Let's go to Galatians 5:1. Let's reread this. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. So the Apostle Paul, he's writing that Christians are set free from slavery. And this isn't a literal slavery, of course. This is a metaphorical slavery. What is the slavery? What kind of slavery is this? Let's keep talking. Let's keep reading. Verse 2, look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ. You who would be justified by the law, you have fallen away from grace. So Paul is talking about circumcision. That's the slavery he's talking about. And if you're tracking with us throughout the series, this is a little bit redundant. You've been noticing he's been talking about this theme a lot, and it's sort of an awkward topic for us in the 21st century because we don't really think about that sort of thing. But back in Paul's day, that was a big deal. That was the marker for Jews. And Paul says, if you wanted to be a faithful Israelite, if you wanted to be a descendant of Abraham, you chose to be circumcised, and that was the way that you were marked to be a part of the family of God. And as we mentioned in previous sermons, the main reason why Paul wrote this letter was because there were these Gentiles, non-Jews, who wanted to join the church, and they were being told, in order to join the church, you also need to be circumcised. And Paul was writing this letter in response largely to that predicament. And Paul is saying that this enforcement of circumcision is legalism. And this goes against what Jesus stands for. That's why he's saying, if you're doing this, you're falling away from grace. You're operating no longer in the realm of grace. And you're contradicting Jesus' very mission, because Jesus' mission is that he came to save us because we couldn't get right on your own. But by getting circumcised, you're assuming that you can do these things. You can work your way to being right with God. So you're performing this act that's contradicting the gospel. If you say, in order to be saved, I need to do this first, fill in the blank, whatever that is. They might say circumcision. We might say something else today. If you're saying, in order to be saved, in order to be right with God, I need to do something else first, that's legalism, and that goes against Jesus' gospel, because Jesus' gospel says, in order to be saved, you don't need to do anything at all, because I did all the work. So Paul's saying, don't accept circumcision. If you're getting circumcised, you're falling into this legalism trap. let's keep reading. Verse 5, for through the Spirit by faith we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness, for in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. This is a pretty bold statement. He says, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. This is significant because in the law of Moses, which most Jews embraced, circumcision was a big deal, and it was even written that those who are not circumcised are cut off from the family of God. But here, Paul is saying what matters is not whether you're circumcised or not. What matters is whether you have faith working through love. In other words, you can put it this way, it's not the laws that matter, it's your heart that matters. It's not the laws that matter, it's your heart that matters. And I think this is true at both the individual level and the social level. I'll unpack these in a little bit, okay? So let's talk about the individual level. Let's take an example. Let's say, actually, there's a story in the Bible about this. So Jesus, he at one point in time, he was observing some people giving money to the temple offering, right? And these wealthy people come along and they give a lot of money. They drop all this money in this offering box. And this poor widow comes along and she drops 2 copper coins. And Jesus says something that is mathematically wrong. He says, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. He says, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. So how is that true? That this poor widow who put in 2 copper coins is contributing more than all these wealthy people dropping buttloads of cash. It's possible because it's not the laws that matter, it's the heart that matters. You see, these people who are putting in all this money, their heart wasn't in the right place. They might have been fulfilling the letter of the law. There were these Jewish regulations about how much to give, and maybe they were doing that, but they weren't doing it right because their hearts weren't in the right place. And you see this also in the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, and if you're not familiar, you could read it. It's great stuff, starting from Matthew 5. Jesus goes through a bunch of laws in the Old Testament, and he says, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery. You have heard it said, do not murder. You have heard it said, all these things, but I say to you, and he puts another spin on it. And what he does is he is telling you it's not about following the letter of the law, it's about your heart, right? It's about your heart. And I think this principle applies to us in a number of different ways. I encourage you to think about the different Christian activities you do on a day-to-day basis and to ask yourself, where is your heart when you do these Christian activities? Maybe it's reading the Bible, maybe it's praying, maybe it's going to church on Sundays, maybe it's going to a community group, maybe it's giving, whatever it is. We all do, if we're Christians, hopefully, we're doing these Christian activities. I want you to ask yourself, where is your heart when you're doing these activities? Or another way to think about it is, when you are doing all these activities, are you driven by legalism or are you driven by love? Are you driven by legalism or are you driven by love? So that's the principle. It's not the laws that matter, it's the heart that matters. This principle applies at the individual level, and I think this should cause us to pause, look at ourselves. I also think this should apply at the social level. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to unpack this in a bit, but tomorrow's Martin Luther King Day. I thought I'd share a Martin Luther King quote, and it's really fitting in this context. So this is from a sermon he gave on called On Being a Good Neighbor. It's a little long, but bear with me, I'll unpack it afterwards. He's talking about desegregation, okay? Court orders and federal enforcement agencies are of inestimable value in achieving desegregation. But desegregation is only a partial, though necessary, step toward the final goal that we seek to realize: genuine intergroup and interpersonal living. Desegregation will break down the legal barriers and bring men together physically, but something must touch the hearts and souls of men so that they will come together spiritually, because it is natural and right. A vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws will bring an end to segregated public facilities that are barriers to a truly desegregated society, but it cannot bring an end to fears, prejudice, pride, and irrationality, which are the barriers to a truly integrated society. These dark and demonic responses will be removed only as men are possessed by the invisible inner law that etches on their hearts the conviction that all men are brothers and that love is mankind's most potent weapon for personal and social transformation. True integration will be achieved by true neighbors who are willingly obedient to unenforceable obligations. Okay, so what he's talking about is, yes, it's good to have government laws. Desegregation in the law is good. However, that's only part of the solution. It can't get you the full thing because it's not about the laws, it's about the hearts. You can have a society where you have every good thing enforced in the laws, but it won't matter if people don't have those laws written on their hearts. You can do something outwardly. You can go to the same school as somebody with a different skin color, but you won't hang out with them necessarily unless racism is rooted out of your heart. That's what he's saying. And what we need, even more than government laws, is for human hearts to change. What we need more than laws and policies is for hearts to change. Because at the end of the day, it's not the laws that matter, it's the hearts that matter. And just think about it, we have a long history of people passing good laws in our country. You can think about in the 20s, not the 2020s, but in the 1920s, we had prohibition. We passed all sorts of laws banning alcohol, but they soon found that alcoholism remained a big issue, so much so that we got rid of those laws. In the 60s, in the civil rights era, we passed all these laws against racism, but racism remained an issue even till this day. And in the 80s, we started fighting the war on drugs. And as we all know, drugs are still an issue. Substance abuse is still an issue. And so you can pass all sorts of laws, but it won't change a culture. It won't change people's hearts. Laws change, but hearts remain the same. Laws are, of course, important, I think, because they the purpose of laws, I think, is they limit the excesses of sin, but it cannot remove sin from its source. It can't attack sin at its source. To do that, you need to address the heart. And I think that's why the church is more equipped to change culture than the government is. The church is more equipped, more able to change culture than government is, because the government can only change laws, but the church can change hearts. And I think this is a good word, especially for us. It's 2020, it's an election year. And just to be frank, I'll tell it like it is. I think there are too many Christians today who are far too concerned about the battle over laws, and they're not as concerned over the battle over hearts. Of course, I think if you're a Christian, I think it's good if you want to engage in politics. I think there's a lot of things necessary to do. If you want to speak up, I encourage you to do that. I think we need to be engaged with the politics, the culture of our country. However, I think the primary calling of the church is not to change the laws of the land, but to change the hearts of the people. And sometimes it's unfortunate because, sometimes in our attempts to change the law of the land, we're resorting to all sorts of strategies that harden the hearts of the people. We have bullying and social shaming and all these things, and we win these mini battles over the laws of the land, but we might lose these battles over the hearts of the land. And so I think we're trying too hard, some of us, to make Christianity the law of the land, and as we're waging this culture war, I think we're losing the hearts of the people. So anyways, that's a little tangent, something to chew on. Okay, back to the text. Verse 7, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion is not from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view, and the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. Paul here, he's making this analogy. He's talking about leaven, and leaven is basically this thing you put in dough, and it causes things to rise when you heat it up. And yeast is an example of that. And it's this powerful thing. You can take something like a cracker and you turn it into something like a croissant, okay? It's pretty great stuff. And Paul is saying, even if it's a little bit of leaven, you put it in there, you mix it up, it affects the whole thing. So that's fundamentally different. A cracker and a croissant, they're very different things, right? You put in a little bit, you mix it up, it affects the whole thing. And Paul's saying legalism is the same way. You put in a little bit of legalism in your life, pretty much it affects the whole thing. Your whole life is now marked by legalism. And that's why he says you can't just, if you obey this law, you have to obey all the laws because it affects your whole life. You won't have a grace-based gospel anymore. Let's keep going. Verse 11, but if I, brothers, still preach circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Now, this is fascinating. In verse 11, I'll talk about 12 in a bit, but verse 11, he's asking a rhetorical question. He's saying, why am I still being persecuted? And his reasoning is, if I preach legalism, I won't be persecuted. But because I'm preaching the cross, because I'm preaching grace, that is the reason for my persecution. The reason why the gospel message is offensive is because it is a message not of legalism, but a message of grace. That's why it's offensive. If Paul preaches legalism instead, if the church preaches legalism instead, people won't give it a hard time. But the reason why people give it a hard time is because of the offensiveness of the cross. You can sort of think about it this way. All worldviews, all belief systems are fundamentally legalistic belief systems, except for the gospel. Everybody, they operate in the realm of legalism. And what I mean by that, by legalism, is I need to do certain things in order to achieve certain things. Okay, I need to fulfill these demands. I need to fulfill these laws. I need to fulfill these expectations so that I can achieve these things. That's how the whole world operates. That's what we do. That's what we do all the time. I need to work hard at my job so I get promoted. I need to shower and dress nice so this girl goes on a date with me another time. I need to do these things. I need to fulfill these expectations, these laws, these demands on my life so that I can get a new thing, right? That's fundamentally, that's what legalism, and sometimes we apply it in religious context. We say, I need to pray, I need to give, I need to read, I need to have church attendance or whatever. I need to do these things so that God will love me, so that God will accept me, right? And all of that is legalism. And that's verse 12. I'll be back to that point. Verse 12, Paul goes on half sarcastically. He says, I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. This is one of my favorite verses of the Bible. The original Greek actually puts it in an even more crude way. But anyways, the interesting thing is that in Paul's day, there were actually people who did emasculate themselves on purpose. There were some people of certain pagan religions who would intentionally do this surgery to themselves as a sign of devotion to their God. They would actually do this. They would say, I'm not just going to be celibate, I'm going to go all the way and prevent myself from ever engaging in intercourse, right? And so they would actually do this as a devotion to their God. And so I think what Paul is subtly getting at is, if you are engaging in circumcision and thinking that circumcision is the way you're going to be right with God, you might as well go all the way and join another religion and do what these people do. That's essentially what you're doing anyways. These people, they're thinking you're doing this act to yourself so that you're going to be right with God, but you're doing the same exact thing. So you might as well, that's essentially what he's doing, right? And I think what he's getting at is whether you're doing legalism in the church or whether you're doing legalism in another religion, it's all the same. It's all the same. It's legalism through and through. And the difference is not between whether you're in the church or whether you're not in the church. The difference is whether you're engaging in legalism or whether you're engaging in grace. So back to the original question, what are we freed from? We are freed from legalism. That's what this passage is about. What are we freed from? We're freed from legalism. The only system that is not legalistic is Christianity, and that's what's so offensive. Christianity says, you can't get it right. You can't do it on your own. You can't accomplish the thing you want to accomplish. You can't obtain the thing you want to obtain. You need help. You need to trust in Jesus, and Jesus did it for you. And that's the offensiveness of the gospel. Trusting in Jesus frees you from the system of legalism. It reshapes how you think of the whole world. Because you're no longer doing things in order to get things. What you're doing is you understand you already have what you need. And now you do things out of worship and love as a result. So what are we freed from? Legalism. What are we freed for? Second question. Let's keep reading verse 13 through 15. For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you're not consumed by one another. So Paul's saying, okay, you're free. Now what? Now what do you do with your freedom? Don't use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. In other words, don't use your freedom just to bolster yourself up, make yourself better, make yourself more comfortable, but use your freedom for the service of others. And then he says, in fact, love one another, and he's talking about the law. He says the whole law is summed up in this one word, love one another. And that's interesting because he spent so much time talking about how we shouldn't be legalists, right? Don't be a legalist. And then he's saying, fulfill this law. So what does it mean? How are we supposed to fulfill this law if we're not supposed to be legalist? So what is he talking about? Sometimes when we think about freedom, we think about freedom as the lack of restraints, right? We say, we think of freedom as having no chains. The freedom is doing whatever I want without anybody telling me what to do. That's freedom. But I don't think that's quite right. Let's go through some examples. Let's say somebody says, I want to be free to eat whatever I want. Okay, I want to be free to eat whatever I want. And so they eat whatever they want. And I'm sure you know, if someone eats whatever they want, pretty soon they're going to have some health problems. Pretty soon they're going to have all sorts of sicknesses or illnesses, and worst comes to worst, they might die early, right? Because they're eating whatever they want. And so if you think about it, long term, that's not actually very freeing. It's not very liberating. And so your freedom, quote unquote freedom, of doing whatever you want actually leads to a place where you're not as free as you thought you would be, right? Here's another example. Let's say someone says, I want to be free to spend money on whatever I want. I want to be free to spend money without restraints. I don't want anyone telling me how to spend my money. I can spend my money on whatever. And I'm sure you can figure this out. If someone does that, this person will be in debt, okay? And debt is not freeing. It's not liberating, right? That doesn't feel very free. Or let's say someone says, I want to be free to sleep with whoever I want, okay? That, some people might say, that's very freeing for me to sleep with whoever I want. And what that means, I would propose, is that all of your relationships will be shallow and superficial, and you'll never find a spouse. And that's also not very freeing, okay? And so all these scenarios, what these show is that there are ideas of freedom in the short run, which is I want to do whatever I want, that lead to places of slavery, that lead to places of restriction. You see, freedom is not just, I would say true freedom, the right kind of freedom is not just the absence of restraint. In all these scenarios, the absence of restraint actually leads to greater restraints. And so what I do, if I want true freedom, is I actually restrain myself in order to get freedom, right? What is a diet? A diet is restraining yourself. You're choosing only to eat certain things. Why? So that you can experience greater freedoms, right? What is a budget? A budget is you're restraining yourself so that you can experience greater financial freedom. And with marriage, you're restraining yourself so that you can experience the freedom of a marriage. The ironic thing is that all these restraints lead me to a place of even greater freedom. And there's this quote I love from President Woodrow Wilson. He wrote this in this thing called The New Freedom. And it's a little long, but sorry, I have these long quotes today. Bear with me. He asks, what is liberty, or what is freedom? Suppose that I were building a great piece of powerful machinery, and suppose that I should so awkwardly and unskillfully assemble the parts of it that every time one part tried to move, it would be interfered with by the others, and the whole thing would buckle up and be checked. Liberty for the several parts will consist in the best possible assembling and adjustment of them all, would it not? If you want the great piston of the engine to run with absolute freedom, give it absolutely perfect alignment and adjustment with the other parts of the machine so that it is free, not because it is let alone or isolated, but because it has been associated most skillfully and carefully with the other parts of the great structure. So this is a beautiful illustration. What he's saying is, you have this machine, and the way this machine works freely is if every part of the machine is in its right place and doing the right thing and has the right restraints. And if every part was doing its own thing, had no restraints, no limitations, doing its own thing, then you wouldn't have a working machine. In other words, freedom requires restraints. When I was growing up, I took piano lessons. I took piano lessons from age 6 to age 17. And for the first 5 years of those piano lessons, I didn't like playing piano. I was playing these drills, and my mom kept forcing me to practice at home and all this stuff. And starting from around age 11 or so, I started to learn that you could play music outside of just what my teacher assigned. I guess I didn't put two and two together, but I realized, I hear a song on the radio, I can try to figure it out on the piano. I can look up sheet music for the song, I can play it on the piano. And then, I started learning jazz, and I started learning improvisation. So I understood this dynamic to playing piano that I never explored before, and then gradually I started to love piano. And then I started to do this very strange thing, which is I started to play piano on my own without my mom telling me to play piano. And in other words, I was restraining myself to the piano. Why would I willingly restrain myself to the piano, even though before I didn't care much about playing piano? It's because I started to love piano, and I felt free playing the piano. And it's this ironic thing that sometimes the most restraining things in life are the most freeing things in life. Tim Keller sums it up in his book, The Reason for God. In many areas of life, freedom is not so much the absence of restrictions as finding the right ones, the liberating restrictions. Freedom is about finding the right restrictions, the liberating restrictions. Freedom is not about getting rid of all restrictions, getting rid of all restraints. Freedom is about finding the right restraints. You see, restraints are inevitable. We all have restraints. We all have chains. We all have restrictions. All birds even are chained to the sky. True freedom is about finding the right liberating restraints. And what is the most liberating restraint of all? You shall love the neighbor as yourself. That's the most liberating restriction of all, because love demonstrates this union of freedom and restraint. And if you've ever been in love, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you love somebody, it is the most freeing and liberating feeling in the world, and it is simultaneously the most restricting feeling in the world. Because it's most freeing and liberating because you can feel like you can do whatever you want. You have joy and delight like nothing else. And it's the most restricting feeling in the world because you are sacrificing so much time and energy and money. You're giving so much of yourself, restricting yourself in so many ways for that other person. But it's worth it because you feel genuinely so free. You know, that's why people get married. They put these restrictions on their lives because it's such a freeing feeling. It's why people have kids. I mentioned that before, right? You put all these restrictions on your life because it's so freeing. And that's why people become Christians. We put these spiritual disciplines, restraints on our lives. We read the Bible, we go to church, we do all these things, we give money because it's so freeing to be in love with the God of the universe. What are we freed for? We're freed for love. We're freed for love. You see, God doesn't set us free from legalism just so we can do whatever we want. He sets us free from legalism so that we can love. Because in that love, in that act of love, we experience this level of freedom that we've never experienced before. Freedom isn't just the status. Freedom is an experience that you enter into. When you are able to exit out of, remove yourself from the operation of legalism, then you're able to stop worrying about your own needs, your own wants, your own goals. You're able to start loving others, caring for others, sharing life with others, serving others, and that is the most liberating thing. You know, the reason why legalism is so restrictive is because you're always thinking about yourself. You're always thinking about how you can get to the next place. You're always thinking about how you can be better. You're always thinking about how you can be right. But when you're freed from that, you don't need to worry about that anymore. You can be freed up to care for other people. Freedom outside of the gospel inevitably leads to selfishness and independence. Freedom outside of the gospel is about getting rid of these restraints so you can do whatever you want. So you can advance yourself. You can move to better places. But gospel-centered freedom leads not to selfishness. It leads to selflessness. Gospel-centered freedom leads not to independence, but leads to community. Because it's about adding restraints to your life, adding restrictions to your life so that you can experience even greater freedoms. And the reason why is that God loved us first. The reason why we love one another is because God loves us first. It's so basic, but it's so beautiful. Do you see that Jesus put on all of these restraints on himself in his demonstration of love to us? Jesus had the perfect life, no pain, no hunger. He chose to put on this restriction of becoming a human baby. He chose to put on this restriction of experiencing hunger and suffering and loneliness and abandonment and suffering and death. He chose to add on all of these restrictions to his life. Why? For love. He chose to do that for us. He chose to be reduced to such a point that we could symbolize him by some crackers, some unleavened bread. And the more you allow that to sink into your heart, this reality of Jesus adding all of these restrictions to himself so that he could love us, the more you are freed up to do the same for other people. True freedom is imitating what Jesus did and adding these restrictions, adding these restraints to his life in order to love others. I pray that we as a church wouldn't be a church that would settle for little trivial freedoms, worldly freedoms here and there, but we would experience this true gospel-centered freedom, this freedom of Christ, this freedom from legalism, this freedom for love. We're going to pray. We're going to move into a time of communion. And during this time, I just ask you to explore your heart and ask, where is the legalism in my heart? What are the things that I'm striving for? What are the things I'm trying to obtain on my own? And ask God to intervene, break into your heart. Ask him to open it up and remind you he has given you everything you need. He has given you everything you want. You don't need to slave after these things anymore. You can be truly free. Free not to worry about yourself, free to love the way God loved us. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that Jesus chose to humble himself, as Philippians 2, to be like a slave even until death, so that we could be free, so that we could have life. It's so ironic, God, that you've caused us to be free from the law, but to fulfill the law. And we're fulfilling the law not so that we can get things, not so that we can obtain things, but we're fulfilling the law because we are so in awe, so enamored by you, for your love for us, by your love for us, that we want to do the same for other people. May the gospel grip our hearts so that we be free to love, not out of duty, not out of obligation, not out of slavery, but out of worship, out of beauty, out of freedom. May we know the truth, and may the truth set us free. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.